one of the most fascinating characters especially in that final week of Jesus' life is certainly Pilate. And I wondered what it might have been like for Pilate at that time. And so I tried to, as I do sometimes, put myself in that place and imagine a little bit of who he was, what he was like, and what he did. May or may not be historically accurate, but I try my best. You may have heard or read about me. I was a prefect of Rome, governor of Judea, a title that once felt like power. It was a mantle that came with authority, and the strength of Rome was behind it. But now, I'm nothing more than a man caught between two forces that are beyond my control. My name, in fact, the only name that, other than that of the Holy Trinity and the Mother of Jesus, that would be listed in both the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, is Pontius Pilate. And I now know the answer to the question I posed to the young rabbi that they called Jesus when I asked him, "What is truth? But what can I do?" Some days I'm surprised to be where I am in this position of power and authority. It seems pretty unlikely, because not that many years ago, I earned it. But a few years ago, you wouldn't have thought I would be here. But because of what I'd done, I deserved to be here. I was born in the year 10 BC in the heart of the Roman Empire, not in Rome, not in those gilded halls, but in the coastal city, a place called Antium, a place far enough from the capital to feel the pulse of the empire without being suffocated by all that went on there. My father was a soldier, one of Rome's many veterans, and my mother was the daughter of a minor nobleman from the countryside. They had high hopes for me, but not in the way that they had high hopes for my older brother, Claudius. Claudius was the natural heir as the oldest son. He was strong, intelligent, charismatic. I was none of those things. And from a younger age, I knew that. I was the spare, the second son, the one who would never lead, never inherit. And my mother reminded me of that. But she also challenged me and reminded me of something else, or told me something else that I carried with me like a knife hidden beneath my tunic. Because she said, "You can still impact the world, Pilate. If not by blood, then by ambition." And that's what I lived and breathed, ambition. Ambition could take me to a higher realm, and a realm that meant power, where power meant control, and where control was the only thing that separated a man from dust. I was 10 when I first understood the meaning of that ambition. A small rebellion had broken out in Hispania, and my father was called back into service. He was a grizzled veteran in the army by then, and his stories of battle and conquering and triumph always stirred something in me. But this time, something was different when he returned. He came back early, and when I saw him, there was no joy in his eyes, no excitement about victory, only a kind of coldness, like a darkness or a fog that wouldn't lift. His army had crushed the rebels, of course, and there had been casualties always, and not just soldiers, but innocents. A few days after the battle, as they marched through the town to restore order, my father had witnessed something that changed him forever. A man, an old farmer, had stood in front of the Roman soldiers like a statue. His village had been burned and to the ground, his children slaughtered in the process. But what shocked my father was not the man's grief, but it was his quiet defiance. The man refused to kneel. You don't refuse to kneel to the Roman government. In the end, my father had done what he was ordered to do. He had given the command for the farmer to be executed. The man died, though, with his head held high, and my father never spoke of that day again after he told me the story, but I knew the scar that it left on him. From that moment, something inside me changed. I could see more clearly than ever before that there were forces in the world that were at work, and they were much greater than any individual could comprehend. You could be the strongest, the smartest, the most capable man in the room, and yet still be at the mercy of forces that were beyond your control. There was one thing, though, that you could control, and that was how you responded. and in being prepared. That was the key. And so I was determined to marshal my ambition to control my response. Years passed, my family moved to Rome, where I was sent to train in the military and in law, fields that seemed a natural fit for someone like me because I was never going to lead through brute strength, but rather more in finesse, along with persuasion and influence. I was a good talker. I had learned quickly that the world of politics was far less about justice than it was about perception. And the ambition to climb higher, especially at the expense of others, was valued. It wasn't until my late 20s that I first felt that pull of true power. A letter arrived one morning, a summons to the imperial court. The Emperor Tiberius had recognized my potential, and the name Pilate was suddenly no longer just the name of a minor officer in the legion, but one that was whispered about in the halls where emperors dined. As it turns out, I was sent to Judea, a province brimming with tension and unrest, an area where Rome's grasp was loose. The Jews hated us. There were zealots that dreamed of revolt, and the local governor's position was not the most prized position among all the prefects in the Roman government. It was like a poisoned chalice. And I knew, though, that I'd been given a chance to prove myself. I arrived in Judea with all the confidence of youth, eager to bend those people to my will, and I looked at those dusty streets in Jerusalem, and I felt something else, though, something not quite as confident, something like desperation. I mean, I had worked extremely hard to come this far, and I could not afford to fail. But it looked like that the deck was stacked against me. At first, I tried to rule the province with the same iron hand that my father had wielded in Hispania. I attempted to impose Roman law without consideration for the deeply held traditions of the people. I mocked their faith, their customs, their resistance. But something about the land and something about the faces of the people was unsettling. There was a fire in their eyes. There was a fire that couldn't be extinguished by the simple weight of Roman law. They were different. Early on, in an attempt to establish my rule and my authority, I ordered a new set of standards or images of the emperor to be placed in their temple. The Jewish priests and the scribes protested and were outraged. They even called for my removal and rallied all of the people to their cause. And the tensions reached a boiling point, and I began to see that my position was relatively fragile. I had to keep the peace. And so I changed my mode of rule to one of disgust and ridicule of the Jews. I belittled them and their religion. And I mean, after all, they had a king, Herod. He was a puppet of Rome and a weak leader. It should have made my job easy. But what I learned was that these people had some of the same resolve in them that old farmer had that my father told me about. As governor, or prefect of Judea, I didn't live in Jerusalem. I lived in Caesarea Philippi. In fact, I only came to the city during times of the Jewish festivals and celebrations. My days in the city, when I was in the city, were usually filled with meetings and judgments and orchestrating the military and making sure we had people in the right place just in case some of the zealots got out of hand, to keep that from happening. But this day was different. I didn't sleep well the night before, and even my wife was restless. She had bad dreams. But by early morning, I had already made my way through the endless procession of petitions and complaints from the local priests, the tax collectors, the merchants, all wanting my attention and wanting this favor or that favor. And it should have been just another morning in the grind of imperial bureaucracy. But today was different. Today, the high priest had delivered a man to me, a man whose name was becoming infamous in the city, Jesus of Nazareth, a rabbi, a healer, a self-proclaimed king. I had heard rumors, of course, about this Jesus. The man performed miracles. He stirred the crowds with his words. He defied the religious authorities, which I appreciated. And now here he was, standing before me, bound in chains, and accused of crimes that seemed, to me at least, more political or religious than criminal. The soldiers had dragged him into the courtyard, this Jesus, and he stood there, unbowed, his eyes calm, his face really unmarked by the fear I'd come to expect from criminals whenever they were brought before me. But he was not what I had imagined. The man was unassuming, almost frail looking, humble tunic, his hair was messy, but his eyes fixed on me with an eerie serenity. There was a silence between us at first, and it was thick. And the more I studied this man, the thicker it became. I took a deep breath, drummed my fingers against the stone armrest of my throne, and you could tell the city was restless. You could hear people, the crowds outside were shouting for judgment. I had felt the pressure of authority many, many times before, but this time it was different, and this pressure was mounting. And I knew I was going to have to make a decision, and I'd likely have to make it quickly. So I asked the first question, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Simple question, but I asked it more in a tone of disdain, as if the title was of little consequence. And it really wasn't a question of curiosity, it was a question of authority, of control. I needed to know if this man was truly dangerous, or if he was just some misguided rebel that I could deal with pretty easily. The ambition that fueled my rise in the empire also had equipped me with an acute ability to read people, to size them up, to read their body language. But this Jesus met my gaze without hesitation. His expression, totally unreadable. "Do you say this of your own accord?" he asked. Soft voice, but firm. "Or did others say it about me?" And he answered my question with a question. And I remember grinning with a little admiration at this confidence that he had. I mean, after all, I was the one in this setting that asked questions. "I'm not a Jew. Your own people and the chief priests have brought you to me. What have you done?" "I've come to bear witness to the truth," Jesus said. "Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." At that point, I just laughed out loud. What is truth? I had heard that word too many times in my life. I mean, truth was a luxury. It was something that philosophers and dreamers, were all over. But for me, truth was whatever kept the empire in charge, whatever kept the order, whatever kept the peace. Everything else was just noise. But this Jesus, he didn't react at all. He just stood there, waiting. And I looked out toward the courtyard. I could hear the anger of the crowd. I knew what was coming. The decision was already becoming clear. The priests had demanded that this man be killed, they be crucified, accusing him of blasphemy, of claiming to be the Son of God, which was a challenge, a direct challenge to the authority of Caesar himself. And I knew that I could not allow such a threat like that to go unpunished. And the Jewish leaders, they knew it too. The balance of power here was fragile, and any sign of weakness posed the threat of just unraveling the whole thing. I stood up, I paced around my chair for a minute, mulling over my limited options. I knew that condemning Jesus was politically safe. An execution would please the crowds. It would send a message to the people of Judea. The unrest would subside, and Rome would be in control. But something about this man, Jesus, just tugged at me. There was a stillness in him that I couldn't ignore. Jesus wasn't begging for mercy. He wasn't pleading for his life. He was composed. And that composed nature, that calm, just gave me chills. This was not a common criminal. I'm Pontius Pilate, I thought to myself. I'm the prefect of Rome, governor of Judea. I have the power. The people could wait. So I turned to the soldiers and said, "Take him away. I'll deal with him shortly." And I walked back into my private chambers, hoping to find some clarity and maybe some peace in the midst of all that noise. But the weight of that man's eyes, their intensity, their depth, they followed me in there. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something larger at play, something that I couldn't comprehend. A little bit later, the servant came back in and said, "Governor, the high priests are demanding that you pass judgment on him, and they are growing impatient." They outnumbered us significantly. I knew what had to be done. Something deep inside me resisted, though. But after a few minutes, I walked back out into the courtyard, and I looked at the assembly of all these Jewish leaders and the soldiers, and And they brought Jesus back before me. But this time, as hard as I tried, when I looked at him, I could not find an enemy to anyone. The strange calm in this man's eyes was so unusual. I could see that he wasn't afraid. He was resigned. It wasn't just resignation of his fate. It was something more, something that defied everything that I understood about power and weakness. I find no fault in him. And I really kind of said that almost to myself. The crowd went crazy. They shouted for his crucifixion. Their voices, this ever-ending crescendo. The high priest pressed forward, and they wanted blood, and they wanted it now. I looked from Jesus to the crowd, and I gripped the railing in front of me with my mind running through every possible scenario, some way to extricate myself from this decision that I had the power to release this man, to save him. But doing so would mean angering the priests, risking a rebellion in the streets, risking the position that my ambition had earned with Rome. There were not going to be any winners in this game. I look back to Jesus and I ask another question. Do you know that I have the power to release you or to crucify you? I was frustrated. I mean, it was kind of a rhetorical question, but it was also a challenge, a plea. I wanted to say, explain yourself. What do you want? What are you seeking in this? And Jesus looked at me, and maybe a little bit of a smile on his lips. You would have no power over me, Jesus said, in that quiet voice, but that confident voice, unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. And the word struck me like the largest stone in the temple had been lowered down on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I knew intellectually that I was in the seat of power, but I felt small. What could I do? My frustration kind of boiled over at that point. It's just too much. I'm washing my hands of the matter. I said it to myself more than anyone else. And to the chief priests, it's your decision. The soldiers would do their work. The crowd would have their blood. I went back to my chambers, back to the empire, back to the world of power and politics that I knew, but nothing to be the same. And suddenly I felt like I didn't know much at all. This image of Jesus, his eyes, his calm, his words were already haunting me, I knew what was beginning. I knew how it would end. And I also knew that no matter how hard I tried, no amount of water and scrubbing would cleanse my hands. But I really had no choice, did I? And that's what I kept telling myself. What could I have done? To refuse them would have meant riots, insurrection. Rome demands order. They are the law, and I am the keeper of the law. I've quelled rebellions. I've silenced uprisings. I've dealt with criminals before, far worse than this man, Jesus of Nazareth. But he was different. I saw it in his eyes. There was no fear in him, none, only calm. Why didn't he tremble? The criminals I've sentenced, they all trembled, they begged, but not him. Even when he was bound before me, he spoke as though he was the one in command. His words were not the words of a man on trial. They were the words of a man who already knew his fate, as if the whole thing, the trial, the crowd, the very fact that I, Pontius Pilate, was there, were all a part of something that he had already chosen. He claimed to be a king in a world where Rome ruled with an iron fist, and where I sat as the representative of that power with legions behind me. I know power when I see it, but he didn't wield power that I understood. He spoke of a kingdom, but not one of this world. I wanted to laugh. A king with no crown, no army, no land, just a rabbi and a few ragged followers. But who was he really? And why did I sentence him to die? The crowd demanded his blood. They wanted Barabbas released, a murderer, over a man who healed the sick, who spoke of peace. What were they afraid of? What was it about him that scared them so much? When I asked him, what is truth? And he didn't answer. The truth, I think, is that I already knew the answer. The truth was that I failed him, and I failed me. I was a man of action and ambition. But I had allowed this moment to slip by me as I stood between these two forces, trying to please both, only to betray both of them. That night, when I returned to my quarters, the city was quiet, but I wanted to hear his voice again. I knew I wouldn't. Not in the streets, not in the crowds, but in my own mind, there was a voice that I couldn't dismiss. This king, no crown, no army, no land, but somehow more of a ruler than any I had ever known. I gave orders, the lash, the crown of thorns, the cross. It was reported that his last words were, "It is finished." Maybe. But for me, for all of us, it had just begun. As one of my centurions reported that night, and again 3 days later, surely this man was the Son of God. I will never be free of him, not in this life, not in the next. Jesus was, Jesus is, Christ the King. May God give grace to those who believe and have mercy on all who doubt. Thanks be to God. Amen. Wow. I don't know how. All right, I got nothing now, Lee. Yeah, you stole my thunder there, buddy. Interestingly enough, legend, so to speak, has it that Pilate left his post, and he left and went back to Rome to profess faith, and was summarily executed. There's very little history about Pilate. But I think he's a pretty fascinating figure, and wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the case. And so in that spirit, my challenge to you would be to, recognize the power that's behind you. You walk with Christ, and as such, you have incredible authority. You have incredible power, and you really do serve the King. This on Reign of Christ or Christ as King Sunday, but that's every day. And so as you do so, as you walk in that power and that authority and that confidence, may God bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you today and every day.